Think about the last thing you bought online. Maybe it was a new pair of shoes, a lipstick you saw an influencer use on TikTok, or a secondhand coffee table on Facebook Marketplace. We live in an era where literally anything you could ever want is just one click and a swipe up away. But in late 2019, if you were scrolling through Instagram in certain parts of the world, ads for clothing or home decor weren't the only things you might see. You might have seen Instagram stories featuring photos of young women, but the captions didn't list some brand toward the bottom of their pictures. Instead, the woman's height, her weight, her ethnicity, and a literal price tag were what was listed in the caption. It also said, "Clean house, very obedient, $2,500. Right between a photo of your friend's vacation and a sponsored ad for some new workout app, literal human beings were actively being auctioned off to the highest bidder. And the worst part was that the social media algorithms weren't shutting it down. In fact, quite the opposite. They were actively recommending the hashtags used to buy and sell these victims. I think it's fair to say that most people think slavery is a thing of the past, a system that we all finally agreed was atrocious and banished it somewhere in the 19th century. We think of it as a horrible historical lesson, showing the utter brutality and inhumanity of mankind, defined in our brains by wooden ships and physical iron chains. But because we are so busy looking for that specific historical image, we completely miss what is happening right in front of us today. The roots of human slavery go back thousands of years, long before the transatlantic slave trade even, to ancient Greece, Rome, and Han China. If you lost a war, fell into debt, or if your family faced starvation, you were stripped of your rights and turned into property. And as the centuries moved on, the world eventually legally banned the outright ownership of human beings. Or so that's what it seemed. But slavery didn't really go anywhere. It just transformed, adapted to the modern world. And it was eventually given a new name: human trafficking. These tactics have evolved, but the essence of this assault on humanity is the same. Traditional slavery relied on property titles and physical restraints, but modern human trafficking has evolved to use a combination of both physical and psychological confinement through techniques such as fraud, abduction, forced drugging, trap houses, and extreme coercion. So, traffickers still steal people by force, but now they also exploit a person's vulnerabilities, like economic hardship or isolation, or even a need for connection. They use false promises, fake job opportunities, or the illusion of a romantic relationship to lure victims into this horribly abusive world. Human trafficking can look like forced labor in factories, or what is referred to as debt bondage, where people are forced to work off financial penalties of different sorts. By hiding behind the mask of a professional, a relationship, a standard job, or an online contract, modern trafficking tries to trick the outside world into seeing cooperation, where there is actually total coercion. Either way, victims are sometimes sitting in plain sight, but still completely unseen. And sometimes they can be moved around in the dark underworlds, never to be seen again. The latter is how we often think of sex trafficking. The truth, however, is much more nefarious. I'm Nicole Davenport, and this is Great in the Sack, when misogyny leads to mayhem. And today, we're going to be looking at two different types of sex trafficking through two different cases. Now, before we get into these cases, it's crucial to remember that exploitation thrives on isolation. If you or someone you know is in a situation where there are feelings of extreme coercion and or the ability to freely leave, please know that you're not alone. And there is confidential help available right now through globalmodernslavery.org. This website, which is called Global Modern Slavery Directory, is an interactive, publicly searchable database of over 2,700 verified organizations and crisis hotlines, operating across more than 190 countries. Its core mission is to bridge international gaps by enabling victims, survivors, and local advocates to instantly locate and connect with specialized safety nets. These services are free, anonymous, and they are there to help you safely figure out your next steps. Content warning: we will be discussing sex trafficking and child sex trafficking in detail. Use discretion when listening. I also want to mention that it's raining like crazy right now, and I record inside my apartment, so it might be able to be heard here and there, but I will try to clean it up in post-editing. And with that, let's get into it. Drug cartels have had a pretty hardcore reputation, historically speaking. Take Pablo Escobar, for example, founder and leader of the Medellin cartel. At the sheer mention of his name, my brain is flooded with the images of literal tons of cocaine being smuggled across borders, unimaginable amounts of money, and ruthless violence against anyone who gets in the way. I mean, I automatically think of shows like Narcos or Breaking Bad. Hollywood portrays cartels as these untouchable entities. And the thing is, that portrayal's not wrong. They really are that dangerous. But television shows make us think that cartels only care about moving drugs. After the death of Pablo Escobar, the cartel world became much more sophisticated. The newer cartel syndicates, as they're called, realized that they didn't have to rely on cocaine trade alone. They diversified their business. I mean, drugs can only be sold once. But human lives, hell, they could be sold over and over. But long before the modern cartels, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was a massive organized criminal enterprise called the Zwi Migdal, which operated out of Buenos Aires. The traffickers themselves were Jewish, and they specifically targeted impoverished, marginalized Jewish villages in Eastern Europe. They used that shared culture and language to build instant trust. They'd pose as wealthy suitors, sometimes even staging fake weddings, promising the girls and women a beautiful new life in the prosperous new world of Argentina. But as they say in Star Wars, it's a trap. The moment those ships docked in Buenos Aires, these victims were stuck. Their papers were taken from them, and they were forced directly into a massive network of thousands of brothels. Now, there was a huge social panic surrounding what was happening to these unsuspecting victims, and it's kind of complicated. On one hand, you had genuine reformers like Alfredo Palacios, the very first socialist politician elected in Argentina, who had real, authentic anger over this exploitation, and he fought to stop it. On the other hand, the conservative elite and the media latched on to the crisis to stoke xenophobia, fueling ideas about white slavery to win populist votes, even though it was really only happening to marginalized, impoverished areas. When I read about this, my first thoughts went to these fraudulent ideas of white genocide in South Africa, but also this rising idea of white victimhood all over parts of the world, thanks to grievance and identity politics. But the real push behind this Zwi Migdal was systemic corruption. Just like the cartels we see in the more modern day, this enterprise operated with absolute impunity. They literally registered themselves as a legal mutual aid society in Buenos Aires, while bribing police and judges and politicians just to keep themselves active. Pressure from Palacios and the public panic eventually forced the passage of the Ley Palacios in 1913, the first law in the Americas to protect victims of sexual exploitation. This was huge. But a law is only as strong as the people enforcing it. It would take another 17 years before the downfall of the Zwi Migdal, thanks to a survivor named Raquel Lieberman. But that's a whole different story for another day. Anyway, the exact same conditions that allowed the Zwi Migdal to thrive in 1913 are quite similar to those that the brutal Ale clan would operate under. So the Ale clan was a criminal organization based in San Miguel de Tucumán, Argentina. The group was led by two brothers, Angel, who went by the nickname El Mono, the monkey, and Ruben, who went by La Cancha, the pig. They started out in the late 1970s working in the local wholesale fruit and vegetable markets. They gradually expanded their influence by running local protection rackets and using physical intimidation to control people they traded with. Around this time, they took control of the Barra Brava, the violent football hooligan firm for the local sports club, San Martín de Tucumán. For the Americans listening, I mean soccer when I say football. And also, hooligan firms are kind of like an organized gang-like group of hardcore supporters formed specifically to fight rival fans in matches. Anyway, this provided the Ale clan with a large group of men for the purpose of street-level enforcement. By the mid-1980s, the brothers were established players in the local underworld. On December 31st, 1986, the Ale clan engaged in a daytime shootout on the streets of Tucumán against a rival criminal organization known as Los Gardelitos. Two members of the rival group were killed. Despite the public nature of the shooting, the local judicial system acquitted the brothers. This outcome established a pattern of institutional impunity for the clan. Just like the Zwi Migdal, the local police, judges, and politicians were either too intimidated or too corrupt to prosecute them. In the 1990s, this mini-cartel transitioned into a more formalized business operation to obscure their illegal activities. They established a major taxi and rideshare company named Cinco Estrellas, which means 5 stars, managing a fleet of hundreds of vehicles. This transport network gave them the ability to move stolen goods, drugs, and trafficked women across provincial lines without drawing law enforcement scrutiny. So not only did they smuggle women and things, and own a huge taxi service to move these women and things, they also heavily influenced political campaigns and the local police force. It felt impossible for a regular everyday citizen to win against them, because if you went to the authorities, you were basically talking to the cartel itself. But the Ale clan didn't account for one thing: a mother who would have absolutely nothing left to lose. Susana Trimarco was just a regular mother living in Tucumán, nearby her daughter, who she was fiercely protective of, who was named Marita Verón. Marita was a young mom herself, with a 2-year-old daughter named Sol. But on April 3, 2002, the fateful day of a doctor's appointment, their lives would never be the same. So let's take a close look at the timeline surrounding Marita Verón's appointment, which court documents and trial testimonies would later indicate to be a highly coordinated setup by individuals connected to a human trafficking network. The sequence of events began when a neighbor of Marita's, a nurse named Patricia Soria, suggested Marita go to the local maternity hospital to get an IUD, after hearing Marita speaking about not wanting to have any more children for at least the foreseeable future. Soria directed Marita to specifically ask for a man named Miguel Ardiles. Ardiles was falsely presented to Marita as a chief of personnel who could help her bypass long waiting lines to get in to see a doctor. But in reality, he was a hospital maintenance and custodial employee. When Marita made her initial visit to the hospital, Ardiles connected her with a doctor for a preliminary exam, but the procedure was not completed. Instead, Marita was told that the hospital could not proceed because she needed her physical national ID card to stamp her medical chart. Rather than scheduling a routine follow-up, the hospital staff gave her explicit instructions to return the very next morning, which was Wednesday, April 3rd, with her ID card. According to the prosecution in the 2012 trials, this was not normal administrative red tape one might run into in a situation such as this. Prosecutors maintained that Soria and Ardiles used the national ID requirement to deliberately manipulate Marita's schedule. By turning her away and forcing her to return the next morning, they created a specific, predictable window of time where they knew exactly where she'd be walking. Tragically, this inside setup worked, because on that morning, Marita left her house with her ID and 5 pesos in her pocket to make it to that specific appointment as instructed. She was subsequently kidnapped by men in a red car just blocks from her home by brutal force. Some witnesses even stated that it was as if she had been drugged on the spot and then shoved into the car. When Marita didn't come home that morning from the hospital, Susanna went straight to the police with her husband, Daniel, to file a missing person report. But the local cops gave her a response that will probably sound familiar. They told her Marita probably just ran away with her boyfriend, and they refused to look for her. She was an adult after all. Susanna knew her daughter wouldn't abandon her 2-year-old child. At first, she thought she was just dealing with a lazy police department. I mean, we've all seen cases where the police just aren't active enough. But then, something began to feel really off. Susanna would go out and do the legwork herself. She'd get an anonymous tip about a brothel holding her daughter, and then get a legal warrant for the raid. But every time she brought the warrant to the local police, they'd stall. They'd claim that they didn't have gas for the police vehicles. I mean, what? Or that the paperwork wasn't right. And when they'd finally open the doors to a brothel in which a tip was concerned, it would be completely empty. Kinda as if the overbosses had been tipped off. But like, the only people who knew the raid was coming were the cops standing next to her. The ultimate proof of this suspicion that the cops were neglecting to serve and protect came when neighbors reported seeing a heavily drugged girl matching Marita's exact description wandering a nearby suburb. The police actually picked her up, but instead of bringing her home, they claimed they just dropped her off at a bus stop. When Susanna went back to look at the transit station logs, the entire trace of this woman had been wiped clean. There was no paper trail of any of it. And that was the moment Susanna realized that it wasn't just her daughter's return she was fighting for. Now she was also fighting the state itself. By July 2002, 3 months after the disappearance, Trimarco bypassed the compromised local precinct by partnering with a trusted police investigator and family friend, Comisario Jorge Tobar. Comisario in English is commissioner. Utilizing Tobar's official authority, they executed a surprise raid on a suspected brothel called El Desafio in the La Rioja province. Inside the venue, authorities found approximately 60 women held for the purposes of sexual exploitation. Marita was not there, though. Susanna announced to the room that anyone held there against their will should step forward so that they could leave with them. A young woman named Anahi Manacero immediately ran through the crowd and clung to Susanna. Once secured in safety, Anahi provided much-needed intelligence for the case file. She confirmed that Marita had been held captive at that exact location, but had been moved by the syndicate shortly before the raid took place. Anahi lived with Susanna for a period of time where she received legal and psychological support, and she ultimately served as a crucial witness for the state prosecution later. Armed with specific operational details provided by Anahi regarding the interior layout and terminology of the networks, Susanna initiated a series of personal undercover infiltration operations. Because she wasn't yet a publicly recognized figure, she maintained absolute secrecy, even going so far as to hide the operations from her husband to prevent intervention. Her strategy relied on two primary undercover personas. One was dressing as a sex worker to gain access to red light district bars and so-called whiskeyeras in the La Rioja province to observe the women held captive inside these places. The other undercover persona was posing as a wealthy procurer, a madam, looking to purchase or trade women to expand a fictional prostitution business. Through the madam disguise, Susanna gathered the private phone numbers of suspected traffickers, contacting them directly to negotiate prices. In June 2002, she successfully arranged a transaction meeting with a female trafficker. This meeting allowed her entry into a locked safe house holding 12 girls hostage. During the negotiation, the trafficker asked Susanna to specify her preference for minors or adults. When Trimarco requested minors, the trafficker quoted a price of 3,500 pesos, approximately $900 per girl. Susanna exited the premises under the pretense of picking up the funds and immediately contacted Comisario Tobar. The resulting police raid successfully rescued all 12 hostages. In October 2002, Susanna escalated her data gathering operations by traveling into La Rioja alongside 3 Chilean investigative journalists to visually document the ownership and layout of these brothels. During this surveillance operation, guards associated with the trafficking network detected their presence, resulting in a high-speed vehicle pursuit, during which the traffickers unloaded live ammunition at Susanna's vehicle. The intel gathered by Susanna and Comisario Tobar verified that the local syndicates operated via interconnected provincial grids. In 2002 of June, Tobar successfully raided a La Rioja brothel and rescued a woman named Lorena, who had been held in captivity for 18 months. Upon her release, Lorena identified Marita by name and photograph, providing formal testimony that they had been held in the same quarters and confirming the logistical path of the Ale clan's movement of victims. By 2003, the intelligence files indicated that networks extended internationally. Susanna received a targeted tip that a prominent La Rioja suspect, who managed the pipeline sending women to Europe, had moved Marita out of the country. She and Comisario Tobar traveled to Spain to try to track the network. While the international deployment did not locate Marita, the targeted cross-border investigation resulted in federal raids that rescued 25 girls from brothels in Burgos and other Spanish municipalities. 19 of the rescued women were verified to be missing nationals from Argentina and also around Central America. In the earliest phase of these operations, Susanna physically transported rescued women directly into her personal residence in Tucumán to provide immediate safety, medical care, and protection from the corrupt local police. But as her direct undercover intelligence actions increased, facilitating the liberation of at least 129 women, the physical and financial needs exceeded her personal household capacity. To resolve this issue, Susanna formalized her operation in 2007 by establishing the Fundación María de los Ángeles. The organization was structured with permanent legal, psychological, and social work divisions, creating the first comprehensive, non-governmental tracking and rehabilitation infrastructure for trafficking victims in Argentina. Now, by exposing the inner workings of the network of the Ale clan and the La Rioja brothel owners, Susanna became a target for political and criminal retaliation. Intimidation strategies used by the clan involved frequent, explicit threats directed at her household. They frequently detailed specific methods of execution, even threatening to decapitate Susanna and dispose her head in the local river. This happened alongside targeted threats of violence against her granddaughter, too, Marita's daughter, Michaela. And these threats manifested into direct physical attacks. Susanna survived multiple vehicular assault attempts where drivers associated with the local mafias deliberately targeted her on public roads. In a coordinated escalation, arsonists targeted her primary residence in Tucumán. They set fire to the structure of her home, successfully destroying half of the roofing system before the local fire department contained the blaze. The continuous danger required a hardcore restructuring of Susanna's daily life and surroundings. The federal government eventually assigned her a permanent armed security escort. This defensive perimeter extended to her granddaughter as well, who required daily police escorts to travel with her to and from her primary place of education. And this constant intimidation directly influenced her legal defense team. Carlos Garmendia, one of Susanna's lead attorneys who had a professional background within the Human Rights Commission, determined that personal firearms were a necessity for survival. Garmendia purchased and carried a 9mm pistol to every judicial proceeding, investigation site, and public meeting associated with the case. Meanwhile, the prolonged strain of the search took a severe toll on Susanna's family. Her husband, Daniel Verón, developed severe depression as the local investigation stalled. Before his death in 2010, he told Susanna that he no longer wished to live without their daughter. While local authorities in Tucumán tried to marginalize her, though, Susanna's work began attracting international attention, providing her with a kind of global protection against further attacks. In 2007, U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice presented her with the International Women of Courage Award. Susanna also worked with the U.S. Ambassador of Argentina, Earl Anthony Wayne, to track trafficking data in the northern provinces. At the end of his tenure, Ambassador Wayne presented Susanna with the American flag from the embassy as a symbol of international support. As her foundation, Fundación María de los Ángeles, continued to rescue victims, governments began to react. She received human rights awards from both the Argentine Senate and the Canadian government. Nationally, Argentine President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner bypassed the corrupt local courts, meeting with Susanna at the presidential palace to use the foundation's data to draft and pass Argentina's first federal anti-trafficking laws. And this work ultimately earned Susanna a nomination for the Nobel Peace Prize. Yet, despite the global recognition and new federal laws, Susanna's daily reality remained pretty much unchanged. She was a grieving mother, and now a widow, managing a national rescue operation under permanent armed guard while raising her missing daughter's child. When the formal trial against the 13 accused individuals finally commenced in February 2012 in Tucumán, the proceedings brought the grim realities of the northern trafficking networks into public view. The second chamber of the Criminal Court of Tucumán heard testimonies from more than 130 individuals over a 10-month period. Crucially, this included a dozen women who had been liberated from regional brothels during the multi-year investigations sparked by Susanna. Through the first-hand account of these survivors, the court recorded the explicit details of what victims endured daily once they were captured. Based on this evidence, the appeals chamber officially defined these specific properties in La Rioja as state-sanctioned fronts, which was due to the corruption of the state in its involvement, designed specifically for the systematic confinement and forced prostitution of women. The structure of the network relied on what's referred to as dual identity storefronts. During the daylight hours, the locations operated legally as bar boutiques or whiskey clubs, such as El Desafío, Candy, and El Candilejas in the La Rioja province. The living and operational quarters for the victims were entirely concealed from public areas. The women did not reside in standard rooms. They were locked in cramped, windowless back rooms or basements located directly behind or above the primary bar floor. Multiple women and girls, some as young as 14 years old, were crowded into single spaces with minimal bedding and zero privacy. The exits were heavily compromised. All windows facing the street were boarded up or reinforced with iron bars, and the doors leading from the back quarters to the exterior street were kept padlocked from the outside. The commercial exploitation of these victims followed a rigid hourly schedule. The only time women were permitted out of the windowless back rooms was when the bar opened for commercial business at night, and their movements on the bar were monitored constantly by armed enforcement guards. The women were treated strictly as commodities, and each were assigned specific monetary values. They were forced to work continuously throughout the night, servicing clients on a rigorous hourly basis to meet strict minimum quotas set by the managers. All payments were made directly to the bartenders or the brothel madams. The victims never handled the currency. The operators used a manufactured debt system, charging the women insane fees for their forced transportation, daily food, the clothing they were required to wear, and the very rooms they were locked inside. If a woman failed to meet her nightly client quota, the ledger was altered so that her debt expanded, ensuring she could never legally purchase her release. Not that they'd ever really let that happen anyway. To maintain total control over the captive victims, the syndicate implemented a routine protocol of chemical submission. Witnesses testified they were regularly injected with heavy tranquilizers or forced to swallow pills dissolved into alcohol or water. This persistent drugging induced constant neurological disorientation, neutralizing the physical energy required to attempt an escape. Constantly being drugged also broke their psychological will to resist. The clan also did their best to erase the legal identity of each victim. Their national identity cards were confiscated by management upon arrival, to be used for forging travel permits. Inside the clubs, real names were totally banned. The madams assigned each girl a stage name or a number, and if a woman spoke her real name or acknowledged another girl's true identity, she was subjected to severe beatings. The ultimate method of control, though, was psychological coercion. The traffickers routinely detailed to the girls that they knew the exact addresses of their families, the schools their children attended, and the names of their mothers. They were explicitly told that any attempt to escape or signal a client would result in the immediate execution or abduction of their children. Because the victims knew the Ale clan operated with total police immunity, the threats were incredibly effective. Because Marita Verón has never physically been recovered, the exact record of her experience inside this system had to rely entirely on the cross-examinations of the women who were trapped alongside her. One of the most vital moments in the 2012 trial came from the victim named Lorena, who had been held captive in a La Rioja brothel for 18 months before her rescue in June 2012, thanks to Susana. For her personal protection against cartel retaliation, Lorena testified from a secured back room, dressed in a leather jacket with her face and hair completely obscured by a black scarf. Lorena provided the court with details that matched the Ale clan's operational patterns. She testified that Marita had been forced to alter her appearance entirely by bleaching her hair blonde and changing her eye color via blue contact lenses to match her falsified transport documents. Lorena recounted that Marita was in a state of permanent profound despair, speaking constantly about her daughter, Michaela, and stating explicitly that she felt she could not survive the isolation away from her. The trial records revealed that because Marita continuously fought back, refused to comply with the hourly quotas, and attempted to resist the brothel managers, she was singled out for extreme physical violence, bearing visible scars from these assaults. Further witness testimonies confirmed the ultimate cruelty of her captivity. One of the primary operators of the La Rioja properties, Jose El Chenga Gomez, targeted Marita for repeated sexual assaults, which directly resulted in a forced pregnancy during her period of confinement before she was moved to another province to evade Susana's raids. Despite the overwhelming volume of witness testimony, the initial conclusion of the trial caused a massive national scandal because on December 11, 2012, the three-judge panel delivered a unanimous verdict that completely acquitted all 13 defendants on all charges, claiming a lack of direct physical evidence linking them to Marita's disappearance. The ruling triggered massive civil protests all across Argentina, forcing the Supreme Court of Tucumán to step in a year later and completely overturn the acquittals. In April 2014, a new judicial panel handed down definitive federal prison sentences to 10 of the core network members. The primary operations of the La Rioja brothels, brothers Jose El Chenga Gomez and Gonzalo Gomez, were each sentenced to 22 years in prison for the aggravated kidnapping and forced prostitution of Marita. The remaining 8 co-conspirators, which included regional actors and enforcers, corrupt police assets, and whatnot, received sentences ranging from 10 to 18 years. Meanwhile, the top leaders of the enterprise, brothers Rubén La Concha Ale and Ángel El Mono Ale, were sentenced to 10 years each for running the criminal organization and money laundering, though they barely saw the inside of a standard prison cell at all. Thanks to their age, their wealth, and their connections, their legal teams successfully secured home confinement and medical leave under the guise of health complications, allowing them to bypass federal penitentiary. The setup at the maternity hospital was also heavily scrutinized. While the maintenance worker Miguel Ardiles and the nurse Patricia Soria faced intense cross-examination for their roles in orchestrating what happened on April 3rd, Soria maintained an acquittal due to a lack of a direct paper trail, while the brothel matriarch Liliana Medina passed away before she could even face final sentencing. This prosecution of the Ale clan's actions and the actions of co-conspirators finally brought one of the most notorious cases in South America to rest. But it still left so many unanswered questions. Because the central members of this criminal enterprise maintained their code of silence, Marita Verón has never been found. Susana Trimarco's victory was entirely selfless. She used her daughter's tragedy to drag the corruption of the police into the light, which completely shattered the wall of protection that allowed the Ale clan to operate with impunity, and ultimately, she saved hundreds of other women from a lifetime of sexual servitude. But while Marita's direct captors were imprisoned, her missing persons file technically remains open. The abduction of Marita Verón represents the classic, violent image most people have when they think of human trafficking. A physical kidnapping off a public street by a brutal, localized mafia, using padlocked doors and forced chemical sedation to maintain control. But modern sex trafficking has branched out into using techniques that we're going to look at next. Many sex traffickers today utilize a psychological type of playbook based on online grooming, trauma bonding, and weaponized intimacy. And if we're going to talk about what it is that allows modern slavery to thrive, we have to talk about tech monopolies. Mark Zuckerberg and his executives at Meta are having a pretty bad time over the last years. I mean, they have faced massive legal reckonings, including a landmark court case and $100 million jury verdicts, finding the tech giant liable for creating what prosecutors literally called a marketplace for predators. The platform itself functions as its own type of digital human trafficking syndicate, if you think about it. Looking at documented evidence from court filings establishes that Meta had prior notice of the slave markets operating on its apps. As referenced in the beginning of the episode, in 2019, a BBC investigative team documented a booming black market on Instagram where domestic workers were actively bought and sold like property under algorithm-boosted hashtags like #maids4sale. In one specific instance, a photograph of a 16-year-old girl from Guinea was listed on Instagram with a literal price tag of $3,800. The definitive proof that leadership within Meta knew about this surfaced through internal communications leaked in the Wall Street Journal's Facebook files, which revealed that Apple threatened to completely pull Facebook and Instagram from the App Store in 2019 due to rampant human trafficking and slavery on the applications, while Meta scrambled to remove the specific hashtags to satisfy Apple's compliance demands, which, if you think about it, weren't too out of this world, right? Internal logs proved that the corporate executives knew their automated enforcement mechanisms were failing to stop the trafficking pipeline. Recent unsealed internal communications from multi-state lawsuits expose that Zuckerberg directly prioritized platform growth and profit margins over human safety. Big surprise, right? When Meta safety teams presented a formal proposal to hire additional staff and scale up safety protocols to decrease severe exploitation risks towards teenagers, Zuckerberg personally stepped in and rejected the budget increase requests. Furthermore, unsealed court filings revealed a corporate policy dubbed the 15 times rule, exposed that Meta deliberately chose not to terminate or ban accounts that had been flagged up to 15 separate occasions for direct involvement in human trafficking, which allowed known predators to remain operational on the platform. Rather than redesigning the platform after the 2019 slave market scandal, Meta left its predatory recommendation algorithms fully active. Legal filings from Houston, Texas, pioneered by attorney Annie McAdams on behalf of multiple Jane Doe survivors, demonstrate how these exact features were weaponized against minors. The lawsuit established that Instagram's algorithms actively facilitated trafficking by using the people you may know and friend recommendation features to connect vulnerable teenage girls literally directly to local exploitation networks, while traffickers utilized Instagram stories to advertise victims and direct messages to negotiate sex acts. When Meta attempted to dismiss these lawsuits by citing Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, the Texas Supreme Court ruled unanimously against the corporation, stating that the Communications Decency Act does not create a lawless no man's land, allowing internet giants to knowingly participate in the evil of online human trafficking. The corporate negligence creates the exact type of digital ecosystem required for modern sex trafficking and child sex trafficking to thrive. The traffickers using these platforms also use direct messages to hunt for specific vulnerabilities in their victims, posing as boyfriends and protectors. Instead of a physical kidnapping off a street, the trap is entirely psychological and hiding in plain sight within suburban neighborhoods. The most common present-day strategy in the Sex Trafficker's Handbook is known as Romeo trafficking, also frequently referred to as boyfriend trafficking or the lover boy method. According to data maintained by the Polaris Project and the United States Department of Justice, this strategy replaces the traditional physical tools of abduction with highly calculated psychological coercion and fraud. And also, unlike the common public perception that human trafficking relies on physical kidnapping by strangers, data tells us that a significant percentage of victims ultimately know and initially trust their exploiters. Roughly 30 to 55% of youth sex trafficking victims are recruited in this way. The operational timeline of boyfriend trafficking relies on a precise pattern of grooming, isolation, and dependency designed to coerce victims into unwitting participants in their own eventual exploitation. This method of human trafficking is somewhat reminiscent of sextortion, which we covered in the last episode, in the way that it often targets young people. So, it all begins with a targeting phase. While this phase can be initiated in real life, sex traffickers of this nature, and in the present day, most often utilize online areas such as social media platforms to identify minors or young adults exhibiting specific emotional or material vulnerabilities, such as a recent family breakdown, low self-esteem, or financial instability. The trafficker initiates contact by posing as an idealized romantic partner, showering their target with intense affection, validation, and material gifts. A psychological manipulation tactic we know to be love bombing. Once a pretty tight romantic bond is established, the perpetrator implements an isolation protocol, driving wedges between the victim and their existing support networks, including friends, guardians, and school communities. By severing these external connections, the trafficker ensures the victim becomes completely dependent on them for basically everything: emotional validation, shelter, basic survival needs, and this establishes an intense trauma bond. The transition to physical exploitation occurs gradually. The trafficker will manufacture a sudden, catastrophic financial crisis, claiming a massive debt or a business failure, even a threat to their personal safety, and appeal to the victim's romantic loyalty, asking them to engage in commercial sex acts just this once to secure their collective future. Because the victim's reality has been so distorted through the grooming process, they frequently perceive this initial exploitation as a voluntary choice made to support a partner that they love. But once the boundary is crossed, the behavior becomes normalized, and the trafficker assumes the role of a manager or pimp, confiscating all earned funds under the pretense of saving for shared domestic goals. If the victim attempts to resist or exit the arrangement, the trafficker shifts from love bombing to explicit coercion, deploying physical violence, economic deprivation, and targeted psychological threats against the safety of the victim's family to maintain complete control. To understand how this type of trafficking operates in real life, we're going to look at a case that unfolded on the notorious Houston street known as Bissonnette. The Bissonnette track in southwest Houston is an area known locally as the Blade. It functions as a commercial sex market. The population walking this track does not match any type of particular profile, but the overall commonality is extreme youth and vulnerability, with a substantial portion consisting of runaway teenage girls between the ages of 14 and 17, alongside young adult women in their early 20s. Most of these individuals arrive on the track through the exact same pipeline of digital Romeo trafficking, having been lured by local gang elements who exploit their emotional needs. Walking the Bissonnette track means navigating a steady stream of continuous, low-speed vehicular traffic driven by local buyers, while under the constant, aggressive surveillance of block enforcers and pimps who monitor the perimeter from parked vehicles to ensure that no victim attempts to flee or pocket the cash transactions. This case we're discussing involves a victim, a child, who was targeted, groomed, and trapped through social media. The case of Kristen Galvan, known to her family as Kiki. In 2019, Kristen was a 15-year-old honor roll student, a Girl Scout, and drill team member living with her mother, Robin Corey, in Spring, Texas. The process of this trafficking operation began at Kristen's school, where a male peer serving as a scout for a gang chose her as a target for recruitment. Now, this isn't a gang like the Bloods or the Crips. It is strictly a sex trafficking ring, or one could call it a syndicate. Following this identification of Kristen, gang members initiated contact via Instagram, making sure to leave no connection between the scouter at the school and them. They did this by engaging Kristen using a group of local teens and young adults who hung around the gang. They didn't threaten her. They didn't need to. They befriended her. One person in the group posed as a boyfriend figure. They began inviting her to weekend parties, offering her rides, and telling her how beautiful she was. They slowly convinced her to start slipping away from her mother's house for short periods of time to hang out with them, and invited her to local social gatherings. This digital grooming process successfully isolated Kristen from her social network. Robin noticed Kristen's grades dropping and her behavior changing. But the moment she knew Kristen was in real trouble came with a phone call while she had been away from home for a few days. On the call, she enthusiastically told her mom that her new friends had bought her a brand new expensive designer purse. So this is a textbook grooming technique. The traffickers used the purse to show Kristen that her family couldn't provide the luxury lifestyle that they could. They were creating a false sense of security, showing her that they were generous friends who cared about her. Robin immediately recognized this as a huge red flag. She told Kristen, "Nobody gives someone an expensive purse for free. They're going to want something in return. You need to come home right now." But Kristen didn't understand the danger of the situation. I mean, she was only 15. Shortly after that purse exchange, the group handed Kristen directly over to a piece of shit man named Arian Jackson. The moment she entered his apartment, which was the trap house, the luxury illusion vanished instantly. These friends disappeared. Jackson confiscated her phone, locked the doors, and began injecting her with narcotics. He then proceeded to force her onto Bissonnette Street to make back the money they had spent on things like that purse. Now, you might be asking, who the fuck is Arian Jackson? Well, he's the leader of this specific sex trafficking ring in Houston, who operated locally under his rap persona, using his music and his social media presence to project an image of wealth, luxury, and street authority. On his public Instagram accounts, he routinely posted images of himself flashing large stacks of cash, brandishing firearms, and glorifying a very specific predatory pimp subculture. This persona he used was a part of his operation. The gang utilized his online videos, music tracks, and social media aesthetic as a deliberate type of marketing funnel to make the lifestyle look glamorous to isolated, impressionable teenage girls who were being targeted by school scouts. Inside his operation, Jackson was his own hands-on enforcer and manager of the trap house cell. He wasn't an abstract boss who kept his hands clean as the Ale clan had been. He was directly responsible for the daily physical control and psychological torment of the girls, and his mom was an accomplice to this as well. The court records exposed dehumanizing details regarding his level of ownership over the victims. One of which was that, to mark his human property, Jackson forcibly tattooed underage girls with a highly specific visual identifier, a 5-point crown paired with a bag of money. This was his literal personal brand, etched permanently into their skins to signal to other local gangs and pimps on the Bissonnette track that these minors belonged exclusively to his operation. Now, the physical property where Kristen was held did not serve as a commercial venue for buyers. Rather, it functioned as a holding facility and a kind of sensory deprivation unit of sorts for up to 12 girls and women at any given time. Inside the structure, there was total isolation and an immediate cutoff of any contact with the outside world. The daily routine relied on chemical control. The traffickers refused to provide standard food or nutrition to the captives, substituting sustenance with a steady supply of heavy narcotics to maintain a permanent state of physical dependence and neurological disorientation. To enforce compliance with strict nightly financial quotas, Jackson and his accomplices subjected the women and minors to routine physical beatings. The ultimate reinforcement was psychological terror, as the managers explicitly detailed the physical harm and execution they would inflict upon the victims' mothers and siblings if any girl failed to return from the street with the money that they were supposed to have made. Many of these tactics of holding and keeping victims are very reminiscent of Marita's traffickers. It is mostly just the way in which victims were introduced into this horrible world and the level of captivity. 2 weeks after her departure, Houston police officers located Kristen in the Bissonnette area and returned her to her mother's custody. Court documents established that during this initial 2-week period, Kristen had been subjected to severe trauma and rape. While back in her family home, Kristen displayed huge signs of nightmares and fear of retaliation. But despite her condition, she cooperated with law enforcement and provided detailed testimony to the district attorney's office. This critical testimony provided prosecutors with the very evidence necessary to formally convict Arian Jackson, including his mother, who was indicted, arrested, and subsequently convicted on federal sex trafficking charges, alongside him for her role in helping to manage the logistics, guarding the victims, and maintaining the financial books for the trap house operation. Jackson himself pled guilty in federal court to sex trafficking a minor and conspiracy to traffic an adult female by force, fraud, or coercion. In February 2023, U.S. District Judge Lee Rosenthal sentenced him to 27 years in federal prison, followed by 15 years of supervised release. However, the threat of danger did not cease. Even after his subsequent arrest and incarceration, Jackson managed to continue directing elements of his trafficking ring by utilizing an illicit smartphone from inside his jail cell. Fearing that the gang would execute their threats against her mother and younger brothers due to her testimony, Kristen fled her home a second time on January 2nd, 2020, just 1 day after her phone access was restored. Following Kristen's second disappearance, her mother, Robin Corey, initiated a multi-year search operation through the dark underbelly of Houston, very similar to what Susanna had done to try to find Marita. Corey hired private investigators, utilized disguises to monitor the Bissonnette track, and tracked gang-affiliated social media accounts. In February 2021, the Houston District Attorney's Office provided Corey with classified photographs originating from an escort website based in Atlanta, Georgia. Corey identified the features as matching her daughter and traveled all the way to Atlanta to personally confront the individuals managing the online advertisement. While Corey located the other girls pictured in the escort listing, Kristen was not present at the site, and the trail went cold. Throughout her search, Corey collaborated with private rescue groups, utilizing her gathered intelligence to facilitate the location and recovery of several other missing underage girls from the Houston red light districts, though her daughter remained missing. The trajectory of the investigation recently changed through forensic developments. In 2020, just 3 weeks after Kristen's initial disappearance, partial human skeletal remains consisting of a skull fragment were discovered beneath a bridge in Missouri City, Texas. At the time of the recovery, local law enforcement did not conduct immediate DNA sequencing on the fragments, instead uploading a forensic facial reconstruction sketch to public missing persons databases, which was a huge oversight. For over 5 years, Corey continued her active field searches, unaware that the recovery had even occurred. In July 2025, forensic technicians finally initiated formal DNA testing on the stored remains. the genetic results confirmed a definitive match. The medical examiner determined that Kristen was murdered almost immediately after vanishing to protect her family. Forensic evidence indicates she was bound with duct tape, beaten, and stabbed to death, with the remainder of her body missing. The confirmation shifted the case from an active missing persons file to a homicide investigation, highlighting the final lethal consequences of this trafficking ring. Because of the huge delay in testing the remains, the physical trail is completely cold, and the remainder of Kristen's body has never been recovered. The case stands as an active murder investigation, with detectives trying to trace the phone logs and prison messages sent from Jackson's smuggled devices back in early 2020 to prove who gave the final order. The devastating cases of both Marita Verón and Kristen Galvan exposes something that kind of forces us to have to look closer at what sex trafficking is. From the underworlds of Tucumán to the Bissonnette track, it is clear that coercion is a huge part of those worlds. But when we talk about human trafficking, it is easy to assume that it only exists in these extreme, highly organized criminal operations run by gang members and street-level syndicates. The foundational base of this entire multi-million-dollar industry, however, is the slow erosion of a person's boundaries through psychological control, emotional abuse, and isolation. And it is happening every single day in relationships as these words come out of my mouth. Coercion in relationships is incredibly common, and it most frequently targets women. It operates on the exact same psychological playbook as a lot of human trafficking tactics do, designed to systematically break a person's autonomy, will, and soul until they maybe believe that they are making a free choice when they're actually just trapped in a survival strategy. This behavior doesn't require a criminal syndicate to be dangerous. We see milder yet deeply destructive forms of trafficking and sexual servitude occurring between everyday partners without any exchange of money, driven purely by a partner's desire for control. Women are routinely coerced through financial abuse, tech exploitation, and emotional manipulation into online adult webcam modeling, content creation, or non-consensual sexual acts, trapped under the threat that if they leave, they will lose their housing, their financial security, or even their children. If you or someone you know is navigating a relationship where love has been replaced with isolation, where financial access is used as a weapon, or where boundaries are constantly crossed or ignored through use of fear, please know that you're not alone, you're not crazy, and it's not your fault. GlobalModernSlavery.org is a completely confidential, free resource available to anyone facing exploitation, whether it looks like an invisible trap or a physical lock on a door. As of the day I'm recording this episode, the whereabouts of Marita Verón are still unknown. Kristen Galvan's voice was silenced through her murder. Whether it's on the street, on our screens, or within the dynamics of our relationships, there is a constant, never-ending risk for women and girls. And until the day where things finally change, we must look out for each other. Sorry to end on such a sobering note, and I thank you so much for listening. And as always, stay vigilant, stay vocal, because silence is complicity. See you next time.